Time to welcome in our next guest now. Andy Bloser is an associate political science professor for Allegheny College. It's so nice to have you. We spend so much time talking about everything that goes on in more urban areas, but you kind of represent more of a rural area. What's the mode and the mood down there in Crawford County?
Yeah, so I live and work in Crawford County, which is a very rural county in Pennsylvania. And like a lot of rural counties, it's more conservative. Right, and over the last 25 years, rural counties like Crawford County have become increasingly more conservative. And so you see that as you travel through Crawford County, right? There's a lot of folks who I think are very much looking into the presidential election, planning to vote for Donald Trump. But you also see, especially around places like Meadville, which is the largest city in Crawford County. It's only 18,000 people, but it's still the largest small city in the county. And there you see a lot more. The yard signs out for Harris Walls. The college is there, the hospital is there. It's a more democratic area, right? Progressive and Democratic Party aligned area. And so Crawford County is a really interesting microcosm of what you see in the state of Pennsylvania and the nation as a whole, with the outerlying parts of the county being much more conservative and the largest city, even though it's a smaller city, being much more of a democratically aligned area. And so you see a little bit of that. And as we get close to Election Day, the tension hangs heavy in the air. It's a really consequential election. People feel very strongly. And that's playing out in Crawford County just like it's playing out in places all over the state of Pennsylvania and all over the nation.
And we were asking you, how are your students feeling? What are your students saying as we get close to the election?
So a lot of our students come from the Pittsburgh area and come from other places either around the state of Pennsylvania or sometimes the Cleveland area of Ohio, the Buffalo area of New York, and other places around the nation as well. For some of them, this is the most rural area that they've ever lived in. And if even in certain parts of Meadville, but certainly in the surrounding parts of the county, they're seeing a lot more Trump signs than they've ever seen before if they've grown up in more Democratic enclaves around the state. And so there's always, I think, a little bit of an adjustment there, right, in terms of getting used to being in a new part of the state and a new kind of culture. And so I do think that because most of the students there are Democratic voters, there's a tension that kind of hangs in the air sometimes around being in a Democratic enclave in a larger red area. And you see that on the other side as well. You hear sometimes local folks concerned about, the Democratic voters who are primarily college students and things like this. And so there are some, I'd say, very low level sort of tensions that are there, and you feel those close to Election Day. Most of the time, people are kind of living amongst each other. People have good relationships. It's Meadville is a really lovely town. Crawford County is a really lovely county. But around election time, you start to feel that tension hanging in the air a little bit.
I think everywhere you start to feel it a little bit, for sure.
I've always wondered why, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, but why stereotypically are rural voters conservative and urban voters more liberal?
Sure. So to understand this, you got to go back about a quarter of a century, about 25 years, because prior to that, urban areas were a little bit more progressive, but kind of slightly more balanced toward progressive conservative folks. And in rural areas, it was also about a kind of a 50-50 split, give or take. But about 25 years ago, the Republican Party started making really significant inroads in rural communities. They put some real effort into messaging in rural communities, aligning notions of conservative principles, hard work, a certain notion of family values and moral traditionalism that resonated with values that were already in conservative communities, even among some who were voting for the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party began focusing more on urban areas where there were large concentrations of voters that were aligned with some Democratic Party principles. And so that's continued to just grow over the last 25 years to the point where we're at now where, as we approach Election Day in 2020, the Republicans are now trying to shore up, right, the gains that they've made in these more rural areas, and the Democrats are trying to chip into that. That's why you see Tim Walz on the ticket as the vice presidential candidate. That's why you heard Kamala Harris talking about an opportunity economy and those kitchen table sorts of issues, trying to find a message that will also align with some of the values of rural areas. And making campaign stops in rural areas, not Crawford County, but trying to chip into those margins while the Republicans are trying to hold on to them.
So interesting. We could talk about this forever, right? Thank you for joining us today.